people on a huge scale, 47 Rolls Royces and all that. And particularly, of course, this is because people generally, and ourselves too for that matter, find it very difficult to relate the connection between deterioration in social conditions and religion. In a way, it's the last thing people think about. And even we who practice sometimes forget it. But Eshofune exists, doesn't it? It really exists. And we can see evidence of it if we keep our eyes open. So often I've quoted, I know, the terrible winters of World War I, the worst and most awful winters in Europe that probably have been experienced for a long time. It's not by chance that those men wallowed about in blood and mud and slush. And then in the 1950s, the grey, cold summers, most of you won't remember those, some of you will, of the Cold War period. Extraordinary. Looking back on it, we didn't seem to have a really warm, sunny summer for years. And then there was the uncanny heat and dry periods during the oil crisis, where natural resources were being withheld from human beings. Really strange. But the connection is there. Okay, let's go on and take another paragraph. On page 27, 2/3 of the way down, a man such as Honen.
A man such as Honen is in truth the archenemy of the Buddhas and the scriptures, and the foe of sage monks and ordinary men and women alike. And now his heretical teachings have spread throughout the 8 regions of the country. They have penetrated every one of the 10 directions.
So continuing in his theme, Nichiren Daishonin is pointing out the amazing influence which Honen had on Japan. When Sensei was giving this lecture, he said that Honen was always treated like Christ. He had such a staggering effect. He must have been a very charismatic person. He had a staggering effect on people. So, of course, this hold which Nembutsu had once again over Japan caused or created many enemies for Nichiren Daishonin, because he attacked them so without mincing his words in the least. And in the history of Christianity, too, one can see that when a higher religious teaching is being taught as against the established religious teaching, anywhere in history, in fact, the person concerned has always been persecuted. So Christ, whose teachings were definitely higher than the previous Judaic teachings of those days, so Christ was persecuted by the Jews. Those who criticized the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages and shortly afterwards were sent for trial in front of the Inquisition and were tortured or burnt at the stake if they didn't give up their beliefs. Mr. Toda and Mr. Makiguchi refused to give in and cause impurity to Nichiren Daishonin's teachings through the introduction of certain aspects of Shinto. And so they were persecuted and jailed. So it's no wonder that Nichiren Daishonin's life was full of persecution. And it's no wonder that the history of the Soka has been one of persecution too. And of course, inevitably too, we will meet those 3 strong enemies at some point. I have no idea any more than you what form they will take, but it must come. It's unavoidable. As certain beliefs, certain religions find their backs against the wall. So of course they won't do it directly, but in an indirect way, they will find the means to attack us. But we no need to worry. When those times come, I don't know when it will be, but when they come, of course, what we will have to find ourselves holding firmly in our minds, those lines from the Gosho which explain that no attack from outside can ever be successful. It's only the attack of the worm in the bowels of the lion that can bring the lion down. So provided we all and everybody and all our members remain united and firm, determinedly chanting Dhammaka, we will always, always, always win. Okay, on to another short paragraph, page 29. Thus China provided, about middle of the page.
Thus China provided an earlier example of how the Pure Land teachings brought about the fall of an emperor, and our own country offers similar proof. You should not be in doubt about the matter or consider it strange. The only thing to do now is to abandon evil ways and take up those that are good, to cut off this affliction at the source, to cut it off at the root.
So this really it leads towards the end of this particular part of Nichiren Daishonin's on the beliefs of the traveler to whom he's talking. And I think the whole of these paragraphs really shows clearly the difference between shakabuku and shoju. This is pretty fierce language, some of it. It's a very frontal attack, isn't it? It's certainly not persuasion as such, gentle persuasion or discussion. Nichiren Daishonin is really absolutely attacking him straight down the line, trying to slip it, isn't he? Trying to break those erroneous views. And this is the true meaning of shakabuku. Of course, the meaning of shakabuku was distorted by the Soka Gakkai's enemies, and they made out that it was literally physical assault and attack. Of course, the literal meaning of shakabuku, to shake and break, is to attack those views of religion which have been not only in that person's life from birth upwards, but have been in the lives of their ancestors for generation after generation after generation. This is a very special problem in a Buddhist country, isn't it? We don't encounter it here. Therefore, Nichiren Daishonin said in non-Buddhist countries we use shoju. That is to say, persuasion, actual proof in our own lives. All these methods in order to teach this Buddhism to others. But in a Buddhist country, you can't be soft as that sometimes. These feelings are deeply rooted through centuries of attachments to false teachings, which are passed from generation to generation. Therefore, in the end, if a person won't listen, and that person is really suffering, or that group of people are really suffering, the only way is a real frontal direct attack, such as Nichiren Daishonin uses in these paragraphs. So, in a way, fortunately for us, we're lucky we don't use those sort of methods. So, GP, real GP, requires incredible courage, doesn't it? And it requires incredible courage, I think, particularly in a Buddhist country, where you're attacking the very foundation on which the roots of society have been growing. Very different from our task. Though, of course, our task's difficult in another way. Probably all forms of shakabuku are difficult. But I feel theirs, perhaps, requires even greater courage to attack frontally in that way. And of course, the driving force behind Nichiren Daishonin was Kyoji, who was totally concerned with the sufferings of the people and the state of Japan at that time. In just the same way, Mr. Toda was totally concerned with the sufferings of the people of Japan during World War II, as was Sensei. His concern was with the sufferings of the people. And of course, in Sensei's case, his concern, following President Toda's guidance, expanded towards concern for sufferings of people of the whole world. So in the end, all forms of human suffering can be traced back to religion. Sometimes I found that very difficult to believe. But actually, if you really reflect on any form of suffering you see and you dig into it, whether it's on a national scale or an individual scale, it can be traced back to the wrong religion. Even in this country, people haven't all actually practiced Christianity, but they've been brought up in a Christian way. And this has led to sufferings, which we can observe, such as perhaps the most obvious one being ridden with guilt. So the wrong religion is not necessarily the result of the founder of that religion. For example, if you study Christianity, the teachings of Christ, as they're recorded, are extraordinarily pure. They don't cross Buddhism in the least. But through distortion, since they weren't complete because of his early death, through distortion, the way the church has interpreted the teachings of Christ have often been open to the question. And this is what led to the religious wars and the persecution of one Christian by another. So even in the name of religion, such cruelty has occurred. There also, as we've discovered, a class system arose out of Christianity. The fact that God was on a pedestal meant that those who served God were on a pedestal. And therefore the priest became something superior to the ordinary human being. This class system, based on the church, which was originally the central point of social life in this country and in other countries, this was then copied by the middle class as it grew. So you had the merchants, and people with money, the new class of traders, also putting themselves in a separate class from the workers. So even communism in the Soviet states has not eradicated the class system. It's there, as it always has been in every Christian country. Hinduism also produced the caste system, which is a series of classes, which has caused great suffering in the past. In other ways, too, religion has caused suffering because of its incorrectness or incompleteness. I mean, in this country, you could take the appalling treatment of those who were very poor or those who were mentally ill in the 17th and 18th century. So in the case of those who were mentally ill, it was considered that they were possessed by the devil, and therefore they were incarcerated in the most disgusting institutions. If you read Dickens, you can see a lot about what was done to the poor and to those who were sick. Also, in the case of Islam, Islam views all non-believers as infidels. That is to say, something totally inferior. So religion has a powerful effect, even in what might appear to be our non-religious societies of today. So this is why Nichiren Daishonin said inferior teachings are the greatest evil that exists in the world, because they can create such appalling suffering. Even in this country, discussion of religion is absolutely banned virtually up to maybe 30 years ago. People never talked about religion. I'm sure the reason for that was that if a Christian gets into argument with someone else, because Christianity involves blind belief in such things as miracles, the virgin birth, and the rising of Christ from the dead, they are unable to argue logically. Therefore, discussion on religion, in one way or another, always provoked incredible emotion and ended up in fights and duels and goodness knows what. But of course, the ultimate truth, the true religion, must be something that can be discussed in a logical, reasonable way, in considerable detail. And this is why Nichiren Daishonin emphasized, of course, that true religion must be able to satisfy the three proofs. So on that subject of shakubuku and shoju, I gave you a little handout. We have very little time, So we don't need to go through it in detail today. And I'm sure all of you have come across both the five-fold comparison and the 5 guides for propagation, which in a sense show the confident way in which Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism looks upon the expansion of the movement for Kosen Rufu and of Shakubuku in the world when the time is right. So the five-fold comparison shows how in a Buddhist debate you would approach the subject. If you study the Gosho in detail, you realize Nichiren Daishonin is using the five-fold comparison in the way he approaches his arguments. This is very necessary in a Buddhist country, and we wouldn't use such a way much ourselves, but certainly one of these days, some of us are going to have to do it when we have to take on more direct the erroneous beliefs of the scholars, particularly in this country. Scholars in the universities, schools, and also who are responsible for museums and libraries. So I really feel that time, is coming when we shall have to make a beginning to do this, because the material on Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism generally available in this country is totally wrong. This will be a great task. It'll take many, many years, but gradually we have to begin. So in this sense, some of us must really understand how to debate using the five-fold comparison. And then the 5 guides for propagation. This is really to convince both oneself and others of the correctness of this teaching for this age. So the correct teaching that comes from those five-fold comparisons. To prove it, you've got to relate the teaching which you're trying to put across in order to prove it through debate, should one have to do so with a scholarly person. And the intellectual capacity, people's minds and state of life are able to take it in and practice it. And the time, it started in Japan in the chaos of that period of natural disasters. It appeared again in Japan at the end of World War II when Japanese society was in chaos. In the UK, our situation has become increasingly deteriorating. Fortunately, not yet in too violent a way, but nevertheless, it is deteriorating over the last 10 years. At the same time, the great pure law appears. Then the country, that means the society or the culture. Is it suitable for the society or culture? Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, we're proving through the expansion of SGI, through more than 100 countries in the world, that it can blend into any society or culture without actually changing the culture of that country. This can't be said of, for instance, Islam, which requires you virtually to live a life in the same way as the Arabs live their lives. But in Christianity, in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, we are able to live a normal life. And then finally, the previous teaching. That is to say, of course, we must be able to refute those previous teachings in order to spread the true teaching. So probably, the thought of having to tackle scholars and other influential people might be quite scary. And I'm sure this is why Nichiren Daishonin wrote those wonderful lines, which are in the answer to question 6. Can you read them, John?
The host said, "Though I may be a person of little ability, I have reverently given myself to the study of the Mahayana. A blue fly, if it clings to the tail of a thoroughbred horse, can travel 10,000 miles, and the green ivy that twines around the tall pine can grow to 1,000 feet. I was born as the son of the one Buddha, Shakyamuni, and I served the king of scriptures, the Lotus Sutra. How could I observe the decline of the Buddhist law and not be filled with emotions of pity and distress?"
I feel those first few lines are really something which all of us must never, ever forget, particularly as leaders. Of course, it may be daunting sometime when we see the tasks and the challenges that we have to take up. Sometimes it seems like every day there's a new challenge, doesn't it? But to remember those lines, though I may be a person of little ability, I have reverently given myself to the study of Mahayana. A blue fly, if it clings to the tail of a thoroughbred horse, can travel 10,000 miles. And the green ivy that twines around the tall pine can grow to 1,000 feet. This is really what we want to remember. When you do shakabuku, sometimes you're amazed at what you say. That is an example of this sentence. The great law working in you brings out whatever is necessary to achieve your aim, provided your own heart is open to it. This is it, isn't it? It is being open to the Gonzen, isn't it? To be like that blue fly clinging to the tail of the horse and being swept along 10,000 miles. Then all we need, all the ammunition, if you like, the verbal ammunition that we need in order to convince, explain to others, will definitely come. So time is up, and I mustn't go on any longer. But let's take those few lines, not only ourselves, but also to our members. They're incredibly encouraging lines. So when people are really suffering and scared and worried about the future and about the obstacles which they face, really give them those lines, because it can't fail to impress them. This is the last lecture, as you probably know, on the Richo Kofuron for a little while, quite a little while, until after the show. Because of the show and rehearsals, we'll all get busier and busier and busier and busier. We shall have 15 minutes study after each gongyo, before every rehearsal and before every workshop session, building props or scenery or making costumes before they begin. Okay, thank you.